Get ready for Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the 30-minute show packed with an hour's worth of information, bringing you familiar guests on important issues such as immigration, education, the Middle East, culture, religion, and the changing worldviews of Americans and the world. You've seen her on Fox News, you've read her on the World Wide Web. Now here's Sharon.
For such a time as this.
Freeing the minds of the brainwashed masses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Changing Worldviews today. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments today in a case challenging one of President Obama's abuses of power. The House of Representatives have launched several investigations and held numerous hearings. In other situations, lawsuits have been filed in the courts, but they take time to work their way through the system. The abuse before the Supreme Court today, for instance, occurred 2 years ago. On January 4th, 2012, Barack Obama made 4 recess appointments, and no one disputes the president's authority to make recess appointments, but the Senate was in session when he made those appointments. 3 lower federal courts have ruled that Obama's appointments were unconstitutional. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon passed away over the weekend after 8 years in a coma. At the age of 85, family and friends gathered around his bedside to say their farewells. A funeral was held today, and Israel's top leadership attended, as well as U.S. Vice President Joe Biden and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, among other world leaders. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, quote, "The state of Israel bows its head over the passing of former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. His memory will forever be held in the heart of the nation." Sharon played a central role in the struggle for Israel's security throughout its existence. He was first and foremost a courageous fighter and a distinguished general, one of the greatest commanders the IDF has ever known. Nearly 24 people were killed in multiple Iraq car bombs in Iraq. Iran's nuclear deal will take effect January 20th, an agreement between Iran and 6 world powers that would temporarily freeze much of Iran's nuclear program, American and Iranian officials announced today. And that's what we're going to be talking about on today's show: Israel and Iran and America.
You're listening to Sharon Hughes, coming to you from the Wild Wild West, and we mean wild.
Well, thanks for staying with us. Gary Bauer, former presidential candidate and founder of American Values, said today regarding Ariel Sharon's passing, now the war to define him and his legacy will begin. He reported that it was predictable but depressing to see reporters from a number of networks, including even Fox News, engaging in moral equivalence upon Ariel Sharon's death. A CNN headline is a good example. Quote, "Ariel Sharon, hero or butcher." The people who thought Sharon was a butcher and a war criminal were the enemies of Israel. Gary Bauer goes on to say, "I believe that Sharon made only one significant error, and that was to believe that Israel could withdraw from Gaza and get credit in the international community for doing so. The 2005 decision deeply divided Israel, and in short order, Gaza fell into the hands of Hamas. It has been a launching pad for attacks on Israel ever since." Bauer goes on to say that we learned all we needed to know about what Gaza would become when news broke that the Jews who lived there were not the only ones being forcibly evacuated. The Jews who died there and were buried had to be evacuated too. Do you remember that? Jewish graves were literally dug up and the bodies removed because everyone understood that the graves would be desecrated by the Palestinians, as is their practice. Sadly, Israel has no credible partner in this so-called peace process with whom it can make peace. And of course, that is the controversy over the current peace plan that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is currently negotiating between Israel and the Palestinians, alongside of working on negotiating this deal with Iran. But here's some information that the mainstream media, whether it's CNN or any others, are not telling us. That's crucial to understand why this issue is so important, not just for Israel, but for America. As I said at the beginning of the month, that 2014 2014, I believe, is a year to repair what isn't working, to rebuild what's broken and restore what's been lost. Of the four major God-given, God-designed institutions, the family, the nation of Israel, government, and the church. And America has always stood with Israel, but that is fastly fading under the current administration. And so we can't just listen to the sound bites over the mainstream media. We can't just listen to the rhetoric coming from the administration. We've got to put it in context of the whole picture of what is going on and then judge what is accurate, what is true. For instance, Palestinians say, give us Jerusalem or no peace. Ryan Jones, writing for Israel Today, reported that the Palestinian leadership over the weekend again signaled how far we are from reaching a bilateral final status peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, regardless of the determined and ongoing efforts of Secretary of State John Kerry. In a previous report, Israel Today pointed out how Israelis see control over Jerusalem as the next and most significant stumbling block on the road to peace. And we talked about that because polls over the past decade have consistently shown that an overwhelming majority of Israelis are opposed to surrendering to the Palestinians the eastern half of their ancient capital, including the Old City and its Temple Mount. But on Saturday, Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas reiterated that he would be signing no peace deal. He wouldn't sign the peace deal with Israel that did not include explicit Palestinian sovereignty over East Jerusalem. As Kerry returns to the region, the Palestinians will continue to say that eastern Jerusalem is occupied by Israel, but it's the capital of the state of Palestine, and without that, there will be no peace between us. There will be no peace. Abbas told visiting Arab officials from Jerusalem, quote, unless it is mentioned clearly and marked in big fonts that it is the capital of the state of Palestine, there will be no peace with Israel, and I want them to hear this. Abbas strongly suggested that his regime is simply going through the motions in the current round of U.S. peace talks and has no intention of reaching a compromised agreement with Israel. When the current court of negotiations reaches its predetermined end date in a few months, quote, we are free to do whatever we want. The time frame is limited and not open, and our unanimous position isn't secret. So, ladies and gentlemen, it couldn't be clearer to me. I mean, they're making public, the Palestinians are making public their position, and yet the current administration, Secretary of State John Kerry, is moving forward and pushing for this. So, what side is America on? Stay with me. We'll be right back.
Exposing the worldviews behind the political, cultural, and ideological wars being waged in our nation and world, Sharon packs an hour's worth of information into every half hour with news you can use.
Academia is often the wellspring of race hatred. This is something that we need to recognize. Eugenics, indeed, was a campaign to create a master race by do-gooders and progressives. They were attempting to create a utopia.
What's ending up happening is that Christians who say, I don't care about issues, they realize that's what's being used to silence the gospel. If they can silence the truth, they will silence the gospel.
You're being a watchwoman on the wall, Sharon. I say that with all sincerity. Appreciate what you're doing to sound the alarm, and we need more shows like yours.
Changing Worldviews is funded entirely through the tax-deductible donations of our supporters. If you've not done so already, renew your active support today. And if you're new to Changing Worldviews, would you consider helping us with a donation, becoming a monthly partner to help get the truth out and tell the world the side of the story that mainstream media doesn't report? Thank you so much ahead of time for supporting our efforts.
I want to tell you about a fantastic seminar that's coming up in the San Francisco Bay Area on January 17th and 18th. It's the Watchman on the Wall seminar put on by a ministry of Eagle's Wings. If you are just growing in your knowledge and passion for Israel, or you have been standing for Israel for years, this seminar will be an extraordinary way for you to be educated and activated on behalf of Israel and Jerusalem. There's 7 impacting teaching sessions. It's going to be held at the Father's House in Napa on Friday, January the 17th and Saturday, January the 18th. It's $89 per person, which includes all the materials, a manual, 8 CD audio teachings, and a DVD, or $149 per couple. You can register by going to www.eagleswings.to/WOTW or Watchman on the Wall, WOTW Napa, or call 1-800-519-4647, 1-800-519-4647 for the Watchman on the Wall seminar in Napa, California. Join Miles and Catherine Weiss and many others who will be conducting this Watchman on the Wall seminar January 17th and 18th, and there is a student rate of $35 available with ID. Again, call 1-800-519-4647. Again, call 1-800-519-4647. Well, thanks for staying with me. Okay, now I want to bring you part of an interview that I had with David Rubin, author and former mayor of Shiloh in Israel, to talk about the things that I've already mentioned in today's show and to help set the stage for the rest of our shows this week when we will be addressing what's going on in the Middle East, the military coalition that's gathering against Israel, and more on the two-state solution that unfortunately the United States is pushing for. Here's that interview. He is also the founder and president of Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, which is dedicated to easing the trauma that children experience who have been victims of terrorist attacks. The organization also focuses its efforts on rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel. And he started this after he and his 3-year-old son were wounded in a vicious terrorist attack while driving home from Jerusalem. He's also a featured speaker throughout the United States and in Israel. He's appeared on national and international radio and television programs. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, David Rubin returned to his religious roots as a young adult and moved to Israel at the age of 35. David, welcome to Changing Worldviews. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
So before we get into your book, I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about your foundation that you have started.
The Shiloh Israel, or shall I say, if I'm speaking to Americans, the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, in Hebrew we call it Shiloh. The Shiloh Israel Children's Fund was started after this terrorist attack when my 3-year-old son and I were attacked and wounded by terrorists who were shooting at our car. The car went completely dead. I saw 4 orange sparks in front of my eyes. I was shot in my leg. My son was shot in the head. And we both miraculously survived. The bullet that went into my son's head and through his neck missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. The car was completely dead. It was coasting down a hill. I tried to get it to start several times. It was dead. It wasn't starting. Finally, I took a deep breath after 5 or 6 times trying to get it to start, and the car started as if it had never had a problem starting before. So we got away from the terrorists, but not before the 2 of us were wounded, and my son was in intensive care for several weeks. And I was ironically pronounced the 1,000th victim of terrorism in Israel to be hospitalized in that hospital in the previous year and a half. After all of that, after everything we experienced and operations and psychological post-trauma therapy for my son, I felt like I had to give something back, like God had put something in my heart and it didn't all happen in vain. And I had the privilege of turning the darkness of that terrorist attack, the bitterness of our experiences, into sweetness and light. And we've been helping for 7 years. We've been managing to ease the trauma of the terror victim children in Israel, and at the same time rebuilding the heartland of Israel, that biblical heartland that everyone reads about.
I'm so sorry for your experience, but really want to say what an awesome thing that you allowed this to be turned and worked for good. And let's just dive right on into your book here. I know this is not your first book, but we want to focus on this topic, the Islamic Tsunami, Israel and America in the age of Obama. I mean, first of all, Islamic, second tsunami, next Israel and America, and the next the age of Obama. So can you just briefly tell us why you wrote this book, and then we'll dive into it?
Well, I want to point out that I'm originally from the United
States. I was born in the United States, and I grew up in the United States, and I didn't move into Israel until many years later. I've been living in Israel almost 20 years, but up until that point, I was an American citizen. I'm actually still an American citizen, and I moved to Israel not to get away from the United States. The United States is a country that I'm very grateful to, and I still consider myself to be a proud American patriot as well as an Israeli patriot. I don't think there's any contradiction between the two, because the United States is a country that was built on biblical foundations and always had a very strong connection with Israel through history. The United States is a country that had its first president make a speech in which he spoke, George Washington spoke about that connection with Israel, with the people of Israel, and he spoke about the blessings that come through having strong bonds with Israel. So this is something that all of the presidents understood. John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, all of these presidents spoke about the return of Israel, the restoration of Israel to its land, the reestablishment of the State of Israel long before the State of Israel ever was reestablished in 1948. And in fact, Harry Truman, who was the first president, the first world leader who recognized the newly reestablished State of Israel, had an especially biblical connection with Israel and very emotional connection. And the Truman biographer describes only 3 times in all of the time that he followed Harry Truman as being times when the president became emotional. And the 2 times when he was actually in tears were when he met the Prime Minister of Israel and when he met the Chief Rabbi of Israel. And the Chief Rabbi of Israel described the connection with Harry Truman. He went to visit President Truman after the State of Israel was reestablished. The rabbi pulled out his Bible. President Truman pulled out his Bible, and the two of them read together about King Cyrus, the benevolent Persian king who helped Israel to reestablish the temple in Jerusalem some 3,000 years ago. And as he was reading that, President Truman leaned over to the chief rabbi and he said, "Tell me something. Is it true that the hand of God is in the reestablishment of the State of Israel?" And the rabbi said to the president, "The Almighty God put you in your mother's womb so that you would have a hand in the reestablishment of the State of Israel." President Truman burst into tears. He became so emotional. And to me, this typifies the historic biblical connection between the United States and Israel. Now, having said all that, we need to understand that in recent years, things have shifted away with the rise of moral relativism, with the rise of political correctness, shifting away from America's biblical roots and traditional roots. We have a situation where it enabled a president such as Barack Obama to come to office. And his approach has been totally anti-Israel, pandering to the Islamic world. And frankly, the support of Israel and pandering to the Islamic world cannot go hand in hand. It just doesn't work. The Islamic world, based on the roots of Islam, are against Israel and are against the West and are against Judeo-Christian civilization. This is something that concerns me very much, and the more that I saw about what was going on with Barack Hussein Obama coming to office, it arose a deep-rooted love for the United States that I've always had, and I realized that this is something that I wanted to explore. Obviously, from what you've already said about me and what I've described, you can see that I'm totally involved in the life of Israel, but at the same time, it was an opportunity to reconnect with my American roots and to understand how it ties in with my involvement in the State of Israel and the land of Israel today.
David, we're going to have to take a break here, and ladies and gentlemen, when we come back, we're going to continue on this discussion, so don't go away. You don't want to miss one moment of...
Hear that? It's the heartbeat of an infant in the womb at 6 months. His heart's beating at about 140 beats per minute. If he were born right now, his chances of survival would be greater than 50%. But even today, his mother could choose to have an abortion. The law says it's her choice. Each year, more than 18,000 babies who are already in the 5th month of pregnancy are aborted, and it's legal. Roe v. Wade says you can choose to have an abortion for virtually any reason, at any time, right up through the 9th month. It's been over 30 years since Roe v. Wade, and now 1 in every 4 pregnancies ends in abortion. Have we gone too far? Visit secondlook.org and discover the realities behind Roe v. Wade. That's secondlook.org, a message from the Second Look Project.
I want to tell you about a pro-life rally that's going to be held in Santa Rosa, California on January 19th. Sonoma County Pro-Life cordially invites you to attend the annual Rally for Life at Courthouse Square in downtown Santa Rosa on Sunday, January 19th from 1:30 to 3 o'clock p.m. The rally will feature music and speakers celebrating the sanctity and value of life as we remember the tragedy of over 40 million lives lost since abortion was legalized in America. This is a family-friendly event, and all are invited to come and be witnesses for life. Speakers include youth and community leaders, and the keynote speaker is James Jenkins of California Pro-Life. Again, Sunday, January 19th at Courthouse Square, Santa Rosa, California, 1:30 p.m. It's free and well worth it. Bring your friends.
Thank you, everyone, for continuing with us. Really appreciate you tuning in today. I'm talking with David Rubin, author of The Islamic Tsunami, Israel and America in the Age of Obama. He is talking to us directly from Israel, and he is both an Israeli citizen and an American citizen. Let's just dive on into some of these issues that you raised. In your book, you talk about terrorism and how it's impacting America's public relations since Obama's inauguration. I mean, everyone knows that the term war on Islamic terrorism has quietly been done away with, although I'm not so sure quietly with some of the talk show hosts. But the whole idea of that we're not even in a war has really changed the face of what this is all about Muslim Americans are just as American as everyone else. But where in your research and your educated understanding do you think this is coming from, and where is this headed?
I wish that I could say that it's true that Muslim Americans are just like any other Americans. I really wish I could say that it's true. Of course, not every Muslim is a terrorist, and of course, not every Muslim wants to do away with Judeo-Christian civilization. However, every good Muslim, every observant Muslim who observes the teachings of Muhammad and the teachings of the Quran does want to take over Judeo-Christian civilization. And I think it's important for us to understand that from the beginning. I think it's important to say it and say it openly. So having said all that, I think we need to understand where it's coming from. The religion of Islam, unlike Judaism, which obviously comes from Mount Sinai and the land of Israel, the giving of the Ten Commandments and the building of the temples in Jerusalem, and Christianity, of course, comes from Jesus, who was a Jew who lived in the land of Israel. And his teachings eventually evolved into Christianity. Now, Islam was started 1,400 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula by a man named Muhammad, who had 31 wives, unlimited concubines. One of those wives he married when she was 6 years old. They consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. And this is all from the Islamic sources, by the way. I'm not making any of this up. And his behavior, sexual behavior, is of abusing women and abusing children. If he were a pastor or a rabbi today in Western society, the media would have a field day with him. Not only that, but he would probably be arrested, and he would certainly be banned from any kind of prominent position. And so I think it's important just to state it, and to state it once from the beginning. He praised jihad as being the holiest religious precept that a person can follow. Now, in Judaism, we have a concept of loving your neighbor, and what is hateful to you, do not do unto others. And we have the concept in Christianity as well of loving your neighbor. And these are considered to be the highest precepts, whereas in Islam, jihad is undoubtedly considered to be the highest precept. And we see it today. If you look around the world, I'm sorry to say, I'm not sorry to say, but the reality is that there is no such terrorist organization as Baptist Jihad or Jewish Holy War. There's no such thing. Anywhere you look, there is an Islamic terrorist organization in places as far away as Sweden, England, Chechnya, Holland, the United States, Israel, India, and on and on and on. And, of course, all of the Islamic nations.
Let me ask you, David, fast forward now to the Obama administration, who, like you say, he's on the Islamic side versus the Israeli side. He doesn't want America to talk about a war on Islamic terrorism. Also, you talk about in your book that the Saudis helped finance his rise to power.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. This is, I think, a scandal that was buried a couple of years ago. during the election campaign, there was an interview with the former Manhattan Borough president on a cable television network in New York. The former Manhattan Borough president, whose name is Percy Sutton. Okay, now I'm going to ask you and your listeners to listen very carefully as I describe this complex web of relationships, which will lead us right to Barack Obama. So, Percy Sutton, former Manhattan Borough president, former lawyer for Malcolm X, and media mogul in New York City. Always well respected across the board. His views lean to the left, but he was respected across the political spectrum by everyone in New York. Now, Percy Sutton was interviewed on this television network, and Percy Sutton's a black man, and so is the interviewer. And the interviewer naturally asked him, well, Mr. Sutton, tell me, do you know Barack Obama, and what is your connection with Barack Obama? What do you think of him? So Percy Sutton said, well, of course, I think he's very wonderful, and he's very brilliant. Percy Sutton goes on and tells the story of how he received a phone call about 20 years prior. I remember, this interview was in 2008. He received a phone call about 20 years prior to that from a man named Khalid al-Mansour, who Mr. Sutton described as the principal advisor for one of the world's richest men. And Khalid al-Mansour is a radical black American Muslim who asked Percy Sutton to make a phone call to Harvard University on behalf of a young man who was trying to get into Harvard Law School. The young man was named Barack Hussein Obama. And why were they asking him to help out? Well, Percy Sutton said he knew a lot of people at Harvard University because he used to speak there. And Khalid al-Mansour was asking him to make this phone call on behalf of this young man who's trying to get into Harvard Law School. And Khalid al-Mansour also added that they are raising money for Barack Obama. What possible reason would they be raising money for Barack Obama? And who was Khalid al-Mansour the principal advisor to? Who is this rich man? Well, none other than Prince al-Walid bin Talal, the nephew of King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia, who President Obama bowed down to, if you recall. So when President Obama went to this conference of world leaders, and he was standing there bowing down to King Abdullah, people asked afterwards, well, was it proper? Wasn't it proper? Is it proper protocol for the president to be bowing to a king, a foreign king of Saudi Arabia? Well, that was the wrong question to be asking. The question that needed to be asked was, why was he bowing down to the Saudi king? And what laid behind the scenes? Was it a bow of respect or was it a bow of gratitude? And if so, if indeed the Saudi royal family financed Barack Obama's education and possibly a lot more after that, if you remember President Obama's campaign war chest, well, President Obama obviously has a connection with the Saudi royal family that goes back many, many years, and who he may be indebted to, which would account for a lot of the pandering to the Islamic world, aside from Barack Obama's background growing up in a Muslim environment.
Well, if you want to hear more of my interview with David Rubin with Miles Weiss, I encourage you to go to changingworldviews.com and click on the archives link where you'll be able to listen to part 2, but especially watch for every show this week as we talk about Israel and America. So I encourage you to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on KDIA AM 1640 at 4:30 p.m. and every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays for our 1-hour live stream show, which you can access by going to changingworldviews.com, listen online, or by telephone at 424-222-5360, or online, changingworldviews.com. Click on the Blog Talk Radio link, and that'll take you to our online stream show. And there's also archives there as well. And so until I see you next time, this is Sharon Hughes saying it like it is.
Thanks for listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes. You can get more information on today's topic or order a CD of today's show by visiting changingworldviews.com or writing us at Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California, 94975-0624. You can also contact us at talk@changingworldviews.com. That's talk@changingworldviews.com. Our program is listener-supported, and we appreciate your tax-deductible donations to help us get the truth out on the important issues Sharon addresses on the show. So until next time, remember, stay alert, stay informed. We live in a changing world.